Does anyone have that member of your family? That member of your family that you don't talk to that often? Or maybe that branch of your family that you don't have all that much to do with? Maybe you think they're a little different. Maybe you think that they don't do things the way that you would want them to be done. Maybe that one person or that one branch of your family that you struggle to love. If you don't have that family member, I guarantee you know somebody that does. Now imagine you have a rift like that in your family that doesn't just span one generation, it spans 2 generations. Imagine that you don't talk to your cousins because your parents don't talk to their siblings anymore. Now imagine that rift lasts for 10 generations, or 50, or 100. Would you even feel like family at that point? If there has been so much division, would you still feel like you were part of the same family? A few years ago, when DNA testing was starting to become really popular, you get one of those kits in the mail, you take the swab, you swab yourself, you mail it back, and they tell you where your ancestors came from. Well, a few years ago, when that was starting to get really popular, a man by the name of Craig Cobb went on one of those daytime talk shows to have his DNA tested. Now, Craig Cobb is a very outspoken racist. He is one of those people who does not believe races should mix with one another. So he goes on this talk show to prove that in his racial history, the races have never mixed. Now, you might already guess what happens. They do the swab, they do the test, and it turns out that about 15% of his DNA came from sub-Saharan Africa. And maybe I am an awful person, but I love watching that video. If you watch the video, Craig Cobb discovers he's African American. That is an amazing video. Or maybe I'm just an awful person for loving it. But anytime I'm feeling down, I put that video on and I watch him discover anew that he has sub-Saharan African DNA mixing with his perfect Caucasian DNA, as if there is such a thing. But you see how it is, the longer we stay separated from one another, the easier it is to no longer consider one another family. So that brings me to Jesus and the Canaanite woman. Because it's easy to read this as 2 separate races having this mix for the first time, but the Israelites of whom Jesus is descended and the Canaanites have common ancestors. The difference between the 2 of them is a family feud that dated back generations. In fact, if you grab the Pew Bible in front of you, I can tell you where it happened. It was in the book of Genesis, page 8. Imagine having a family feud that goes all the way back to page 8 of the book of Genesis. If you know the story of Noah, you know after the flood, Noah had a little drinking problem, and his grandson got involved in that and got cursed because of it. It's a complicated story, but that's what it goes back to. That's where this family division goes back to. It goes back to Noah, Noah's children, and Noah's grandchildren. In fact, one of the cities that Jesus is going to is named after Noah's great-grandson, one of Canaan's children. So these are the Canaanites, the ancient enemy of the Israelites. You start at page 8 and you go forward a little bit to the book of Joshua. That recounts the great conflict between the Israelites and the Canaanites. And throughout the Old Testament, the Canaanites are villainized. And right up into the New Testament, into Jesus' life, the Canaanites are the villains of the story. So what the heck is Jesus doing in Canaanite territory? If Jesus is coming for the lost sheep of Israel, what the heck is he doing way out mingling with the Canaanites? Well, I've got this theory. I think Jesus wanted to get away from everyone who knew him for just a while. If you've been following along with us the last few weeks, you'll know that there's been this theme of Jesus trying to get away from people. We started that 2 weeks ago, right? We heard about the death of John the Baptist and Jesus wanting to find some alone time. But what happens every time Jesus wants to be alone? People follow him. People want things from him. And Jesus, being a good teacher, never leaves without fulfilling the needs of those who come to him. So 2 weeks ago, we heard about Jesus trying to go off and being alone and being forced to not only teach, but to perform this miracle where everybody is fed when there's not enough food to go around. Jesus has been trying to get away. So I think what Jesus is doing is he is getting away. He is going to go somewhere where nobody knows his name. So he gathers up his closest followers, his disciples, and he says, let's go to the region where the Canaanites live. Nobody's going to know us out there. And as soon as they get there, what do they hear? Jesus, help me! Jesus, 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 stop and help me! And you can almost see Jesus, oh, even here they know me. I can't get away from them even in Canaan. I gotta tell you, I kind of feel what Jesus is going through. Anytime that I get a Sunday off and I'm looking for a church to go to, I intentionally try to find one where nobody knows who I am. Because there are just moments when we just need to sit there and be fed, where we want it so nobody is demanding our time, nobody is demanding our attention. We just want to be fed. And here is Jesus going off once again to a place where nobody is supposed to know him, maybe so he can just be fed for once. And as soon as he gets there, there's this woman nagging him right from the start. Jesus, help me. Jesus, my daughter needs help. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He ignores her. The disciples have to go and say, Jesus, send her away. She's bugging us. Get rid of her. And then Jesus does something that is hard for me to read. Jesus confronts her, says that she is unworthy of what he is doing, that he was sent to the lost sheep of Israel, and how dare she, a Canaanite woman, demand anything of him? And then he goes one step further and calls her a dog. That's not a cute puppy dog he's calling her. This is not a polite term of endearment. This is rude. This is insulting. In fact, we still have a word in our language for women that is relating them to dogs that I won't repeat in a church today. Jesus is not being nice to this woman who is coming with all of her needs bared openly to Jesus. And I don't know about you, but this does not sound like the Jesus that I fell in love with. This does not sound like the Jesus that I want to get to know. This Jesus sounds a little racist. This Jesus sounds a little mean. I would be kind of afraid to ask this Jesus for anything, thinking, what might he call me? Now, because of the harshness of this story, people have come up with all sorts of theories about what is going on, trying to excuse the words that Jesus uses. Some of the theories are that Jesus is testing the disciples, that he has brought them out here and he is ignoring this woman, hoping the disciples will rise up and say, we need to include someone like her. I hate that theory. I hate that excuse for what Jesus is doing, because here is this woman who is going through this very painful situation with her daughter. And I don't like the idea of Jesus using somebody else's pain to test somebody's loyalty or somebody's understanding. There's the theory that Jesus is testing the woman, that this Canaanite woman comes and bears her soul to Jesus, and Jesus tests her to see if she is faithful enough. And I don't like that theory either, because again, I don't like this idea that Jesus tests us when we're at our most vulnerable. And then there's the idea that Jesus Christ, while being fully God, is also fully human. And the human part of Jesus Christ grows and learns just like we do. And that the human Jesus was discovering in that moment that his mission in the world was bigger than even he had imagined. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't like this theory either. I have a pretty high Christology, a pretty high opinion of the divinity of Jesus. But this is the theory that makes the most sense to me. As much as I might dislike it inside, it makes sense to me that Jesus would grow and learn just like we do. So remember, Jesus is being born and raised and is living in a culture of deep racial divisions. Jesus was raised with systematic racism. Jesus probably harbored, at least from the words that we read, a level of ethnocentrism. It's probably hard to hear, but I think it teaches us the most, not only about Jesus, but about our mission in the world as well. Because Jesus in this moment learns the same thing that so many of us have learned over the years. That the story of God is bigger than we thought it was. The story of God is bigger than we had dreamed it could be. Through an act of grace and mercy, Jesus learns that his own story of salvation that he is bringing into the world is growing by leaps and bounds. And when we ignore stories like this, or when we try to dismiss them as saying, oh, Jesus was just testing these people, Jesus didn't mean it, we fail to acknowledge that we are on a journey of growth too. We don't come into this world fully formed. Rather, we grow as we experience the world, and I pray that we grow in our understanding of how inclusive God's kingdom really is. Each time we hear somebody else's story, each time that we enter somebody else's life, each time we act in ways of grace and mercy with someone we had once called other, every time our grace and mercy break down walls of segregation and separation, every single time that happens, we are growing the understanding of what it means to be an inclusive kingdom. Every time we grow beyond ourselves, we grow what it means to be an inclusive church. What an amazing gift this gives us, to know that we are on the exact same journey that Jesus took. That we may have been born and raised in a world filled with divisive divisions, filled with racism, filled with ethnocentric thought, filled with war and violence of one culture against another, filled with family divisions that date back centuries. That might have been the world we were born into, but it is not the world we have to live in. Because Jesus shows us how to draw the circle wider, how to make the table bigger, how to invite others into the same story that we're living. Jesus shows us a kingdom getting bigger by the moment and invites us to be a part of that kingdom too. Let's be in prayer together, folks. Wondrous God, most merciful God, we are approaching you this morning, coming out of a culture where division seems commonplace, filled with people who deny that divisiveness, ignore that division, segregate themselves willingly or unwillingly. That's the world we come out of, oh God. But as we begin to understand your kingdom work in you, we realize that that is not the world we leave behind. Rather, we are going through the hard work of growing the kingdom, including more and more people, finding those who have been left out or left behind, and judging them not on their worth, but on their sacredness. Because, Lord, you created everything, and you created all to be sacred. Lord, help us when we engage in acts of grace and mercy to dream of who else we can include in the kingdom work of God. And help us to be amazed when we discover just how big that kingdom is going to be. I pray this in Christ's holy and blessed name. Amen.